My wife cheated on me once, and that was all it took. She probably thought she had everything under control, never expecting how things would unravel. It wasn't like there were any major red flags leading up to it, just the same old routine. After 15 years of marriage, whatever love we had between us had gone cold. We were just two people sharing a house, living separate lives. Slowly, it dawned on me that we weren't partners anymore. Not even close. We weren't confidants, and we certainly weren't lovers. It all started with her becoming distant, dropping little hints along the way. I picked up on the signs, and it wasn't long before I figured out she was involved with someone else, or at the very least emotionally. Her complaints grew louder, but they weren't anything new. For years, I'd ignored her criticisms, tuned out her jabs. But this time I actually listened, really listened, because this time I had proof. She wasn't happy in our marriage, and she wasn't shy about admitting it. She was falling out of love with me. I thought about telling her she was wrong, that we could fix it, that I still loved her and wanted to save our marriage. But deep down, I knew she'd only pull further away. I could already picture the look in her eyes, the way another bridge between us would crumble. I cursed under my breath, clutching a beer, replaying our last argument over and over in my mind, searching for any way to win her back. She was mine, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But the harder I tried to hold on, the more she slipped away. I sat alone, long into the night, while she slept in our big, empty bed. I was drowning in my own feelings. Then, in the middle of that emotional haze, a different thought started creeping in. Why was I fighting her feelings? Why was I trying to convince her she was wrong? And then it hit me, I couldn't. Her feelings were her reality, and here I was, trying to tell her she was mistaken. How ridiculous is that? You can't tell someone they're wrong about how they feel. So, why was I even trying? That was the moment I decided to stop. The real question became, how did I feel? And as I sat there, reflecting on everything, something clicked. I wasn't happy either. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I truly loved her anymore. What I'd been clinging to wasn't her. It was the idea of being married to the woman I once loved. But that wasn't our reality anymore. That realization was like a light bulb turning on. The puzzle pieces were slowly coming together in my mind, and a plan began to form. Whether it would work or not didn't really matter at that point. What I did know was that what we were doing wasn't working. After all, isn't insanity repeating the same thing over and over, expecting different results? I smiled to myself, tossed the empty beer bottles in the recycling bin, and decided to sleep in the guest room that night. Rachel walked into the guest room, flipping on the light, flooding the room with brightness. I squinted against the glare, trying to wake up. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, sounding confused. I blinked in the light and replied, "I stayed up late. Didn't want to wake you." She gave me a quick glance before heading off to the kitchen to make herself some coffee. I've never needed coffee to get going. Lucky for me, I can wake right up the moment I get out of bed. I showered, got ready for work, and felt a new spring in my step. That evening, Rachel sat across from me in the living room, while I settled into my usual spot on the couch. She was clearly on edge. Her hands were clenched into fists, and I could tell she was working up the nerve to say something big. "Ryan," she began, her voice shaky, "this isn't working. I'm frustrated, confused, and I don't think I love you anymore." I sat there, silent, just watching as she struggled to get the words out. Finally, she said it, "I think we should get a divorce." The words lingered in the air like a heavy fog between us. To her surprise, I smiled and just looked at her. She seemed unsure how to react, studying my face for some kind of response. "That sounds fine," I said calmly. She blinked, almost like she couldn't believe what she just heard. "Ryan, did you hear what I said?" I nodded. "Yeah, I heard you. You're not happy, you don't love me, and you think it's time for a divorce. I understand." She looked startled. "You agree?" she asked, thrown off by my response. I stood up and walked over to her, kneeling in front of her. "Rachel, I can't argue with how you feel. If you say you don't love me, there's nothing I can say or do to change that. It's not something you can debate. And honestly, there've been times I've felt nothing for you too. So, if this is what you need, I won't stand in your way." For the first time, I think she was genuinely shocked by what I said. I could see that deep down, she was relieved that I wasn't going to put up a fight. "Wait, there were times you didn't love me?" she asked, sounding rattled. I smiled slightly. "Just like you," I replied. Her face twisted with a mix of confusion and frustration. Clearly, she had rehearsed this moment over and over in her mind, but it wasn't playing out the way she expected. I found it kind of funny, watching her wrestle with her emotions. Breaking the silence, I said, "So, is there anything else? I've got plans tonight, and if you don't mind, I'd like to wrap this up. You're planning to move out soon, right?" I got up, headed for the hallway, and grabbed my jacket. "Wait, Ryan, where are you going?" she called after me. "I'm going out," I said casually. Figured I'd hit a few bars tonight, maybe start fresh. No time like the present. I waved as I walked out, leaving her there with her mouth slightly open, stunned by how smoothly I'd taken the news. I ended up at this quiet, older bar and ordered a bourbon, taking a seat by myself, away from the crowd. I sat there, sipping my drink, and moved on to the next phase of my plan. I called Amanda, a coworker who loved nothing more than gossip. I played the part of the heartbroken husband, telling her how Rachel had blindsided me with the divorce talk. Officially, I made the call to let her know I might not make it to work tomorrow because I was drinking my sorrows away. But unofficially, I knew exactly what I was doing. Amanda and I had flirted a few times at the office, and I knew that this call would pique her interest. Sure enough, she invited herself out to watch over me during this tough time. We agreed to meet at a lounge, one that Rachel and her friends often hung out at. Was I worried about being spotted? Not at all. As far as I was concerned, my marriage was already done, and my feelings for Rachel weren't what they used to be anyway. Amanda showed up, looking sharp but a little thrown together, like she'd rushed out to meet me before anyone else had the chance. But as soon as she sat down, I could tell something was off. She was picking up on the disconnect between my story and my demeanor. The smile on my face didn't exactly fit the role of a devastated husband. Amanda caught on quickly. "Ryan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion as she sat beside me. I raised my hand, showing her the empty spot where my wedding ring used to be. "She wants a divorce," I said. "That's how she feels, so why should I fight it?" I waved over the waiter to get another drink, while Amanda ordered her usual cosmopolitan. "But you sounded so upset on the phone," she said, clearly confused. I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "Amanda, we've both been unhappy for a long time. Truth is, I probably don't love her the way I used to. She wants out, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to sit around miserable and unloved." Amanda took a long sip of her drink, watching me closely. I could see she was trying to figure out this new version of me. My attitude seemed to be catching women off guard lately, leaving them unsure of how to respond. "Shall we dance?" I asked, not waiting for an answer as I grabbed her hand and led her to the dance floor. "Ryan, what are you going to do?" she asked as I pulled her closer. "I'm going to give her whatever she thinks she wants," I said. "And I'm going to do what I want. Right now, that's dancing with you. Honestly, I've wanted to do this for a while. Now I finally can." She looked up at me, a soft smile spreading across her face. "If this is about getting back at her?" I raised an eyebrow, meeting her gaze. "And if it is?" She leaned in, pressing her body against mine. "I'm fine with that," she whispered. We lost track of time on the dance floor. It felt freeing not to worry about Rachel anymore. No more checking my phone or feeling like I owed her an explanation. Amanda was fun, sharp, and the flirting flowed naturally. She was mine for the taking, and we both knew it. But I didn't take her. Just knowing she wanted me was enough for now. After Rachel had bruised my ego, Amanda was there to patch it up. Later, in the parking lot, we shared a kiss by her car. I helped her inside and smiled. "See you at work tomorrow." She nodded, understanding that while I was open to a little fun, I wasn't diving into anything serious just yet. By tomorrow, word would be all over the office that I was newly single, thanks to Amanda's reputation for spreading gossip. To be honest, I was looking forward to rubbing it in Rachel's face. Just a little. "Where were you?" Rachel demanded the moment I stepped inside. She had been in bed but rushed out as soon as she heard me come home. I took off my jacket and started getting ready for bed. "Out," I replied simply. "I told you I was going out. Why do you care?" "Ryan, I was worried," she said, her voice softening. "I thought you might do something reckless." I couldn't help but smile at her concern. "Rachel, I know how you feel. I'm okay with it. You want a divorce, and I'm more than willing to give you one. I'd never force you to stay with someone you don't love anymore." I gathered up my pillow and clothes for the next day, ready to head to the guest room. "Ryan," she called out hesitantly. I paused at the door, shifting my things to one hand. "What is it?" She stared at the floor, avoiding my eyes. "You don't have to sleep in the other room, you know?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting you'll move to the guest room?" I asked, making it clear that I wasn't going to make things easy for her. She gasped, trying to hold back tears. "That's not what I meant. I mean, if you want, you can still sleep in our bed. If not, I guess I could move to the guest room." She was flustered, clearly not expecting things to play out like this. The idea of actually leaving the bedroom hadn't even crossed her mind. I figured I'd put her out of her misery. "Well, this bed is definitely more comfortable," I said. "I'll stay here, as long as it's not too much of a problem for you." Her face lit up immediately. "Oh no, it's fine. No trouble at all," she replied quickly. "Good," I said, tossing my pillow back onto the bed. She seemed like she wanted to talk, but I was too tired. I told her to get some sleep and that we'd talk later. Sure enough, by the next afternoon, I'd already been approached by 3 different women at work. Even one of my friends slipped me his sister's number, saying she was a widow looking to date again. I set up dates with all 4 women for the following week, including another night out with Amanda. But I made sure to leave tonight open. I still needed to talk to Rachel. We had to figure out what the next step was, and she needed to move on, or so I thought. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me, and she was furious. "Megan saw you last night at the lounge," she snapped. "She said you were with a woman." "Who was she, Ryan? What were you doing?" "Megan said you two looked pretty cozy." I could have yelled at her, reminded her of all the times she'd been out with other men, slowly pulling away from me, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled and told her I'd answer her questions after I changed. She tried to argue, but I ignored her and went to change out of my work clothes. When I came back, Rachel was waiting for me, glaring with tear-filled eyes and anger radiating from her. She was ready for a fight. "That was Amanda from work," I said, not bothering to deny it. I'm sure she expected me to lie. "What were you doing?" she demanded. I met her eyes and calmly replied, "We were on a date." Her face twisted in shock. "A date?" she repeated, her voice rising. I nodded, staying seated, keeping my calm demeanor. "You have no right," she shrieked. "We're married. What makes you think you can do something like that?" I stood up, walked into the kitchen to grab a drink, then sat back down. Rachel remained standing, her eyes locked on me, waiting for an explanation. "Why does it matter?" I asked evenly. Her jaw dropped. "We're married," she shouted. "You want a divorce, don't you?" I asked, and she nodded, but no words came out. "You've said you don't love me anymore, right?" I continued. "I'm not in love with you," she corrected. "Exactly, Rachel. You're not in love with me. So why shouldn't I start looking for love somewhere else? You want out, you don't love me anymore. What's stopping me from moving on?" She sank into a chair, looking completely stunned. "What will people think? Don't you realize how this looks? Megan's already spreading it all over town about how my husband was seen out with another woman." She glared at me and then spat out, "Don't you dare call Amanda a 304. My voice dropped to a low growl. "She's been nothing but a lady, and I was a gentleman. Don't you dare drag her through the mud. She went on a date with a married man. Rachel snapped back. That makes her a 304. I stood up, pacing slowly in front of her. So if Amanda's a 304 for dating a married man, what would you call a married woman who spends her time with other men behind her husband's back? Rachel froze, her eyes wide, and I could almost see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew. What does that have to do with anything? She stammered. I just looked at her in silence, letting the truth settle in. Her body started shaking. How much do you know? She whispered. Enough, I replied. Whether you slept with him or not doesn't matter. What matters is you cut me out of your life long before this. The moment you did that, our marriage was over. I'm not going to sit here and cry over it. I'm moving on, looking after myself, because clearly, I don't have a wife who's interested in doing that anymore. I got up and headed back to the kitchen. There wasn't any dinner waiting for me, but I didn't care. I made something for myself. Rachel could sort out her own meal. A little while later, she wandered into the kitchen, quietly watching me finish up my dinner. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I finished cleaning up the dishes before turning to her. I'm sorry too, I replied. Just so you know, I've got plans for the rest of the week, so don't expect me home until late. And if you'd prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't say anything in response. I headed upstairs and decided to stay in the guest room again, knowing she probably wouldn't sleep well that night. The next evening, I met up with Christina after work. She was a nice woman, mid-30s, blonde, divorced with 2 kids. We grabbed some coffee and then did something totally out of left field. We played laser tag. Yeah, 2 grown adults running around with a bunch of teenagers, getting wiped out in every game. Christina loved it. Between rounds, we sat and talked, waiting for the next match to start. During the last game, we both got killed side by side and dramatically pretended to collapse. As we lay there, I pulled her close and kissed her. She kissed me back. Afterward, we had a nice meal, and I walked her back to her house. We made out for a bit before saying goodnight. She didn't want to rush things, and I promised we'd go out again soon. I was more than happy to agree. When I got home, I half expected another argument with Rachel, but she seemed unusually subdued. Hi, she said quietly as I walked in. I smiled while I undressed. Hello. You seem like you had a good time, she remarked, her tone carefully controlled. I did. Thanks for noticing, I replied. How was your evening? For the first time in months, we actually sat down and talked. Really talked. We stayed up most of the night, discussing everything we hadn't been saying to each other. I listened to her and she listened to me. I never slept with anyone, Ryan, I swear, she admitted. I kissed a few guys, and I opened up to Alex at work. He wanted more, but I wasn't ready. I nodded, acknowledging her words. Rachel, I know we're both at fault for what's happened. You may not have slept with anyone, but you still cheated on me emotionally. We were supposed to be a team, but I respect that you didn't rush into asking for a divorce. And I should have listened to you more instead of constantly arguing. Yeah, she agreed softly. We sat there in silence for a while. Then she broke it again. Ryan, I don't think I really want a divorce anymore, she said, her voice uncertain. I smiled slightly. Take your time figuring it out. I'm not kicking you out, and I'm not leaving either. Ryan, she asked as I was getting ready to head to bed. Are you still going to date Amanda? Yes, I replied. I'm seeing her and others too. You do what you need to do, Rachel. Figure things out. I have to do what's best for me. If we end up divorcing, then it wasn't meant to be. I moved toward the guest room, but she followed and stood in the doorway. Ryan? She called softly as I pulled off my shirt. I turned to face her. What is it? Come back to bed with me, please. I hesitated. I don't think I want that anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know. I just want you right now. I opened my arms, and she ran to me, crying, lost in her emotions. I took her back to our bed and held her as we both drifted off to sleep. The next evening, I went out with Stephanie, a good friend. She was a self-proclaimed geek, and we bonded over TV shows and fan culture. She had been dying to check out this dive bar with live music, but none of her other friends were interested. So I took her. We had a good time. Even though we flirted a lot at work, there wasn't any romantic chemistry between us. We called it an early night, and I headed home. It was a fun, platonic evening. When I pulled up to the house, there was a car parked in the driveway. I felt a brief flicker of jealousy seeing that car in the driveway, but I quickly talked myself down. I remembered something my therapist once told me during flying phobia therapy. Everything will be what it will be. And it was. When I walked in, Rachel was sitting there with her friend Megan. "Ryan, I didn't expect you back so soon," Rachel said, her voice tense. "Rachel, Megan." I nodded to both of them. Megan, though, shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Things ended early, so I came home," I said. "Do you two want some privacy?" After a quick exchange of glances between them, Megan stood up. "I should get going," she muttered, still glaring at me before heading out the door. Once she was gone, I shrugged. "Sorry if I interrupted anything," I said. "Don't be silly, Ryan. This is your home too." "Home?" I echoed, as if the word was foreign to me. "When's the last time either of us actually called it that?" "Did you eat?" she asked, changing the subject. There were some leftovers from whatever she and Megan had, so I picked at them while Rachel tidied up the kitchen. "How are you?" I asked, my mouth full. "I'm fine, I guess," she replied, sitting down. I invited Megan over to talk, but she just made me more confused. "Oh, she told me to kick you out, change the locks, and push ahead with the divorce." Well, my key still works, so I'm guessing you haven't called the locksmith yet," I joked. She let out a small laugh. "I had to explain to her that I'm the one who asked for the divorce, that I'm the one who told you how I felt. What right do I have over you now? I gave you up, didn't I?" Her eyes searched mine, the question lingering there. She was waiting for an answer, desperate for one. I decided to change the subject. "So, bad news. I had a date planned for tomorrow night, but it got canceled. Now I'm stuck with these concert tickets. Want to go with me?" Her face lit up. "Oh, Ryan, I'd love to. I mean, if you want me to." I shrugged. "Well, they'd go to waste if I didn't use them. Maybe I'll give them to someone at work." "No," she said, more forcefully than I expected. "I mean, I'd be happy to go with you." "Happy to go with me?" I teased. She blushed, nodding. "Yes." I smiled. "Might be fun." The next day, I broke the news to Nicole about canceling our date. She was disappointed, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Rachel was ready and waiting when I picked her up after work. She looked incredible, like she'd gone all out to impress me. And honestly, it worked. I wasn't too familiar with the band, to be honest. Nicole was the one who recommended them when I bought the tickets. They turned out to be pretty good, loud, but good. So it wasn't a total shock when we bumped into Nicole at the concert. Rachel, though, was clearly surprised by how attractive Nicole was. It didn't take long for her to piece together that Nicole had been my original date for the night. I apologized to Nicole, who glanced over at Rachel. "Nicole, this is Rachel. Rachel, this is Nicole." She was supposed to be my date, but, well, things changed. Normally, I'd introduce Rachel as my wife, but this time I left that part out intentionally. Rachel picked up on it instantly. "Nicole, so nice to meet you," Rachel said, locking eyes with her. "I'm Mrs. Osborne." There was something unspoken exchanged between them, a silent challenge. Nicole, being quick on her feet, excused herself and said she'd see me at work tomorrow. As soon as she was gone, Rachel's hand gripped mine, her voice simmering with frustration. "Ryan, where's your wedding ring?" I shrugged. "At home. I took it off after you asked for the divorce. Figured I didn't need it anymore." Rachel stood there, momentarily speechless, and I had to admit, I was starting to enjoy the power of rendering her quiet. "Ryan, we aren't divorced yet," she said, clearly trying to regain some control of the situation. I just smiled, focusing back on the music. Throughout the night, I made several trips to the bar to refill our drinks. Every time I went, Rachel watched me closely, and every time, another woman would approach me. I'd chat with them for a bit before returning to our spot, feeling Rachel's eyes on me the entire time. I made one of the women laugh, and she even slipped me her number. Rachel saw it all, but she didn't say a word. I'm not exactly the ladies' man type, but I've always had a playful sense of humor and could flirt a bit when the mood struck. After Rachel asked for the divorce, I let myself flirt openly without feeling tied down. I wasn't the best-looking guy around, but my sarcasm and wit worked well with women who liked a guy who didn't beat around the bush. For the first time in a long while, Rachel got to see that side of me again. I think it caught her off guard. Those same moves and jokes had once won her over. And tonight, I think she remembered that. The drive home was quiet. She didn't say much, and I followed her lead. Once inside, we both went through the motions of getting ready for bed. "Ryan, where's your wedding ring?" she asked again. I nodded toward the sock drawer. She walked over, opened it, and pulled out the gold band. She stared at it for a while, then looked at me, her eyes full of emotion. "It's yours now," I said gently. "I think you should have it." She looked at me, confused. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Anything you want," I replied. The ring used to symbolize our love, our marriage. It was a shield, a way to show that we were committed, that we were off limits. I always hoped it did the same for you, but now, it just reminds me of what we had. Since you've changed your mind, I guess I don't need it anymore. I held her gaze, making sure she understood. "When the time is right, you'll know what to do with it." I walked over, gently closed her fingers around the ring, and stepped back. She looked at me, holding the ring like it was a weight she didn't know how to carry. "Ryan," she called softly as I began to drift off to sleep. Thanks for tonight. I had a good time." "You're welcome," I replied quietly, already halfway into sleep. When I woke up, there was breakfast waiting for me. Rachel had scrambled some eggs and fried up some bacon. She was never much of a cook, but the effort didn't go unnoticed. She was still wearing her wedding and engagement rings, and I saw her fiddling with them as she ate. Later that morning, my phone rang. It was Megan. "Megan, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. What's up?" "Lunch today. 12:30 at the Olive Grove," she said curtly, then hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, unsure how to interpret the abrupt invitation. I didn't know Megan that well. She was one of Rachel's friends from work, part of that group that often met up for drinks. While attractive, she'd never been particularly friendly toward me. When I arrived at the restaurant, Megan was already sitting at a table with white linen, her face tight and serious. This wasn't going to be a pleasant lunch, that much was clear. After I sat down and placed my order, she cut straight to the point. "What the hell are you doing, Ryan?" Rachel's in agony. And here you are, parading around, dating other women right in front of her. My face flushed. It was the first time in a while I'd felt embarrassed like that, angry too. I bit my tongue, knowing whatever I said would make its way back to Rachel. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm while Megan glared at me. She was waiting for an answer. After a long pause, I finally spoke. "Megan, how much do you actually know about what's going on with Rachel?" "I know her husband is acting like a complete asshole," she shot back, her voice loud enough that a few people nearby turned their heads. "Cut the crap, Megan," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Answer my question honestly, and I'll answer yours. I've got nothing to hide. Can you say the same?" Just then, our food arrived, and she took a moment to compose herself. I leaned back, not even touching my plate. "Rachel's confused," Megan finally admitted, her voice low. "So confused she needs to see other men to figure things out?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Megan flushed and took a long sip of water. "Rachel had some weak moments, Ryan," she muttered defensively. "I'm sure she did," I replied, irritation seeping into my voice. "We've been trying to help her work through things," Megan continued, her tone defensive. "See, that's exactly where I have a problem," I said, leaning forward. "Why is it the responsibility of her friends to help her figure out her marriage? Shouldn't I, her husband, be part of that? Shouldn't she be working through things with me?" Megan went silent, her eyes dropping to her plate. "And, honestly, what business is it of yours anyway?" I added, She's my friend, she said softly, almost apologetically. Right? I said, leaning back in my chair. And I'm supposed to be her best friend, her partner, her husband. Don't you think if she had issues, she should have talked to me about them? Instead, she turns to her friends, and you all decide it's a great idea to take her out to places where she can work through her feelings by kissing other men. Men who clearly have no problem kissing another man's wife. Megan paled and seemed to have lost her appetite, but I wasn't done yet. Let me ask you something, Megan. Are you married? She shook her head. No. Ever been married? No. Do you have any qualifications in marriage counseling? Pressed. No, she mumbled, squirming under my questions. So what makes you so qualified to give advice on marriage? I asked, my tone blunt. You've never been married, so you have no clue what it's like to live in a marriage day after day. What gives you the right to meddle in someone else's relationship? She gasped, clearly taken aback by my directness. But I'm her friend, she said, her voice shaking. Funny, I said dryly. From where I'm sitting, you don't seem like much of a friend. How many times have you even spoken to me? Once, maybe twice? I've been married to Rachel for 15 years, and yet you've never made any effort to get to know me, the man your friend married. Megan was staring at me now, speechless. You say you're counseling her and guiding her through this, but you only know one side of the story, Rachel sighed. Have you ever bothered to ask about mine? I could see she was holding back tears now. I had gotten through to her at least as much as I was ever going to. But I had a message to deliver, one I knew she'd take straight back to Rachel. Megan, I began, softening my tone a little. Rachel made her feelings very clear. She's the one who wanted the divorce. She looked me in the eye and said, I'm not in love with you anymore. Now tell me, how am I supposed to argue with that? How do you tell someone they're wrong about how they feel? She wasn't wrong. She asked for the divorce, not me. So why should I sit around, miserable, hoping she changes her mind? I finished off my drink, though I had barely touched my meal. My appetite had long since vanished. As I stood to leave, I glanced back at Megan. I found that other women out there see something in me that my wife doesn't anymore. Rachel pushed me away. I didn't push her. I'm not going to sit around waiting while my partner is confused or doesn't want me. There are others who do want me. Rachel didn't. How she feels about that is her own business now. I've accepted it. I paused, making sure she was listening closely. And Megan, you say you're her friend. But when Rachel had her weak moments, you didn't stop her. You let her indulge in those moments, forgetting she had a husband at home. Think about that. With that, I left the restaurant, not giving her a chance to respond. I knew the moment I walked out of that restaurant, Megan would be dialing Rachel's number. But at this point, I had other things to focus on. Work was calling, and tonight I had plans with Brooke. Things with Brooke were going really well. She was different from the other women I'd been seeing. She was younger than me, but mature, confident, and undeniably attractive. When she first joined the company, we were polite and professional. But a few months in, I was telling a somewhat risque joke to a group of guys when Brooke happened to walk in right at the punchline. The whole room went silent, waiting to see how she'd react. When I finally turned around to face her, she had this wide-eyed look of shock. I grinned mischievously and said, "Admit it, it's both true and funny." She stood there for a moment, her expression practically screaming, "I can't believe he just said that." Then, out of nowhere, she burst out laughing. In that moment, she became one of the guys. But by the end of our date, she was all woman. Brooke let me get further than any of the others. Still, at the last second, I was the one who pulled back, turning down her invitation to spend the night. As much as every part of me wanted to say yes, there were still things with Rachel that I needed to settle before crossing that line with someone else. Later that night, when I was in bed, Rachel spoke to me. Her voice was small, trembling. "Ryan." "Yeah," I answered. "Ryan, I need you to go take a shower." "What?" I asked, confused. The room was dark, and the lights were off, but I could hear the sobs catching in her throat. "Please, Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. "If you won't shower, I'll have to ask you to sleep in the guest room. I was completely perplexed. What's going on? I asked, flicking on the bedside lamp. When I turned to her, her face was twisted with tears. Please, Ryan, she pleaded, her body curled up tight. You can come back to our bed, but I'm begging you, please shower. I don't understand, I said, still not getting it. You know, I always shower in the morning. She turned away, her back to me, shoulders shaking. You smell like her. That's when it hit me, Brooke. I hadn't realized her scent had clung to me. Guilt washed over me. I'm sorry, I whispered. I didn't realize. Look, if you want me to sleep in the guest room, I will. Just say the word. No, she sobbed. I want you in our bed. Ryan, I can't handle you smelling like someone else. I can't. I'm sorry. I want you here, but it's hard enough knowing you've been with other women. I can pretend you were just out with the guys. I can ignore it when my friends tell me they saw you with someone else. I can even meet women like Nicole and tell myself you're just friends. But now I know. I can smell it. I can tell. She looked at me, eyes pleading. I want you here, but only after you've showered. I can't handle her scent on you. I stared at her, torn. You made your bed and let me go. Don't ask me to change now, I said quietly, before walking out of the room and heading to the guest room. It was Saturday morning and I slept in. The week had been long, and going out every night was starting to catch up with me. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and I could feel exhaustion creeping up. So much for being a big player. Rachel woke me up with breakfast. After we ate, she asked me what my plans were for the weekend. I don't have any, I told her. Ryan, she said softly, standing by the kitchen table where I sat. What is it? I asked. She reached into her pocket and pulled something out. Rachel knelt in front of me, opening her hand to reveal my wedding ring. She took my hand gently, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. Ryan, I want to work on our marriage. I don't think I really thought things through, she said, her voice trembling. Tentatively, she began sliding the ring back onto my finger, but I stopped her. I still love you, she whispered. I'm still in love with you. She stayed there, kneeling, waiting, hoping for me to say something. After a long pause, I finally spoke. Rachel, when two people get married, they vow to stand by each other, through sickness and health, for better or worse, and to forsake all others. But you forsook me, your own husband. You saw problems in our marriage, but instead of coming to me, you went to your friends who aren't even married. You chose to confide in other men, pushing me further away. Whether or not you slept with them, I don't care anymore. The moment you sought comfort from someone else, you left me. She stayed quiet, her eyes pleading for forgiveness, but I had more to say. Every day I was apart from you, I thought about it. And you know what? I'm happier without you. I'm happier without the weight of your betrayal hanging over me. It would be foolish to think we could just go back to how things were before. I don't want a life where, every time we argue, your cheating becomes the focal point, causing us both more pain. I took a deep breath and continued. Tomorrow morning, you'll be served with divorce papers. I've already arranged for us to divide everything equally, and you can keep the house. You might want to speak to a lawyer, but I'm done, Rachel. You made the choice to cut me out of your life, and now I'm making the same choice. Rachel collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood up and went back to the guest room, where I slept soundly for the first time in a while. The next morning, I packed my things. Rachel was still in the kitchen, probably sitting there all night. I sat down near her one last time. I'm not here to apologize or to blame you, I said quietly. I just want you to understand that maybe we were never meant to be together. With that, I walked out of the house and out of Rachel's life. 6 months later, our divorce was finalized. As part of the process, the court required me to go through counseling, but I knew it was just a formality, a way to delay the inevitable. My love for Rachel had long since faded. Throughout the counseling sessions, Rachel kept insisting that she'd never slept with anyone else. But in the final session, I finally spoke up. Rachel doesn't love me, I told the counselor. You're calling this confusion. But confusion is something you deal with before you get married. Marriage is a decision. You push through your doubts and commit to spending your life with someone. If you're confused after marriage, that's a different issue. Sure, we live in a modern world, but if cheating is as common as you say, then what's the point of marriage at all? If fidelity doesn't matter, then marriage becomes meaningless. And if cheating is common, then so is divorce. You cheat, you get divorced. It's pretty simple, cause and effect. The young counselor didn't have much to say in response. She seemed inexperienced, unsure of how to handle the conversation. The divorce went through, and after 6 months, I was free. Am I happy? Not exactly. Am I sad? Not really. Somewhere along the line, my happiness and sadness just kind of broke down. Do I enjoy life? Yeah, I do. I date women, I train, and I work. But did I rush into another relationship? No, I wasn't in the right headspace for that. I needed therapy to sort out my mind and heart. What really helped me, though, was martial arts. I know I'm too old to compete, but who says an old dog can't learn new tricks? Rachel eventually remarried. I got an invitation to the wedding, but I didn't go. Megan got married too, but she was divorced 5 months later. Turns out her husband had a smart prenup in place. Will I get married again? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe time will have the answer.